National VOAD was born really out of a need in 1969 after Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf Coast. At that point in time, faith-based organizations were really leading disaster response and recovery in the United States. So 6 faith-based organizations came together alongside the American Red Cross, and they asked themselves, is there a way that we can do this without duplicating services in a specific disaster area? Is there a way that we can do this better together? So soon after that, in 1979, FEMA was formed, and emergency management became more professional on the state and local level. We followed suit in that same way, and state VOADs were born in the 80s and 90s, and now we have one in every single state and territory, totaling 56.
Well, it was significant because it was the first time a Category 5 had hit since 1969, and it hit in a major metropolitan area, Dade County, Miami. All the infrastructure was destroyed. There were no grocery stores, there were no drug stores or anything. The Salvation Army immediately mobilized to get the necessities in. So we set up a center in Homestead, and we used that as a staging area. Other agencies would come and we would be able to work together. We had our mobile kitchens there, as well as in Fort Lauderdale, where we had the bulk of our supplies. You needed to help normalize life, get people some good hot food, stuff like that. What Andrew did for a lot of us was help us to realize we need to professionalize a lot more. In order to be effective, we had to figure out a way to work together. We had to figure out a way to build on the strengths of different organizations, different agencies, to meet the needs of the people who were just in desperate situations.
You know, on the morning of September 11th here in New York City, it was a beautiful day that everyone knows turned tragic for the whole country and world. In terms of how it changed things for the faith sector and the human services sector in the city, we'd all worked together for decades, but we'd never really worked in a coordinated way to respond to a crisis across the entire city and that affected the entire country. The emotional and spiritual toll that 9/11 took on New Yorkers was breathtaking. The need for spiritual care, disaster chaplains, was profound. Thousands served at Ground Zero. So the spiritual services that were provided, the emotional support systems that were put in place were critical not only to the families of the victims and the recovery workers, but also to the long-term recovery community of first responders and volunteers and unionized workers that helped dig out the pit.
I think Hurricane Katrina was significant for its scope and scale, but I think we can't even have that conversation until we really first acknowledge how horrific that event was, and that the response of the voluntary agencies was challenged beyond our wildest dreams. We said at the time that case management is the key to recovery. Having experience being a disaster case manager after 9/11, the importance of all of a person's recovery is key. So not just a roof over your head, which is critically important, of course, but there are so many other aspects of who we are as human beings that need attention. And that case manager has to learn how to communicate with people who have all kinds of expressions of grief and loss and suffering, and really tie into them in those notions of what's really at the root of their suffering that they can alleviate immediately, so that we can then take their next brave steps together in their recovery. Case management and that relationship is probably the most important avenue for the most vulnerable people.
So if there's any kind of best case scenario when it comes to a disaster response and volunteer management, this was it. It was a very large disaster, but it was also very contained. National Guard was set up a secure perimeter around the town. So the only way that volunteers could come in is if they went through our volunteer reception center. And so that allowed for very easy tracking of those volunteer hours. It made sure that those volunteers were used in safe and appropriate ways, that they had the oversight that they needed and the safety precautions that were needed, and also kept those volunteers out of the way of other first responders and life-saving operations that were going on, particularly around search and rescue. So we knew from 9/11 and from Hurricane Katrina that managing those spontaneous volunteers that show up after disaster was incredibly important. What we learned from Joplin is this is what can happen when we have a highly coordinated volunteer mission.
We all knew that it was going to be a devastating event and a major disaster, but it was only after that we could see the extent of the damage.
When you're looking at 17 counties in Texas, hundreds of thousands of homes that were impacted, to be able to bring together our National VOAD leadership and to look at organizations that had experience not only in disaster case management, but also in the management role.
Catholic Charities, who were responsible for the public relations, AmeriCorps providing the disaster case management training and ongoing training.
Doing the financial oversight that St. Vincent de Paul did.
And the ICNA Relief was in charge of resource management. Lutheran Disaster Response provided all of the compliance. Project Comeback, it gave us that opportunity to see that we can maybe take this to the next level.
So I think it's been a great national model. It shows that organizations can work together. We're not competing against each other, we're complementing each other.
And truly become a platform that will raise the level for disaster response and recovery. Things are changing so fast, and the role of younger volunteers is vital. We have to really look for ways to bring them in. We need their expertise.
I think as faith-based organizations, a lot of times we are set in our ways.
Making sure that we're out in the community.
We have to be prepared for whatever the future brings to us.
COVID-19 has changed everybody's world.
That was a startling reality that we were facing, and I think now that as we look to the future, we know that we need to adapt to the specific community and the specific disaster that is facing them.
How can we help a family recover in a manner that is respectful, dignified, uplifting, non-judgmental?
It's paramount that in our 50th year as the VOAD movement, and in essence 50 years since the Civil Rights Movement, that we take far more seriously what it means to reflect the nation that we serve.
The way that we build resilient communities and the way that we recover from disasters.
Getting stronger community support, getting those community members that are going to be leading the recovery engaged sooner. Getting them the training and the technical assistance and the resources.
That everyone has a seat at the table, that everyone is brought to bear their expertise, their understanding, their experience. This diversity, I think, can only enrich the efforts.
Those of us who are part of National VOAD, we have a wonderful story to tell.
Collaborating,
Cooperating, communicating,
and coordinating.
We are a very resilient people surviving through all this. And I think that says a lot to the tenacity, to the mission, and to the heart and soul of this organization.